I never wanted to move back to Arkansas. After spending most of my career in busy city hospitals, the thought of returning to my hometown of Cherokee felt like swallowing a jagged pill. But when my father passed and my mother's health took a turn for the worse, I didn't have a choice. She needed someone, and I was the only one left. So I packed my scrubs, kissed the bustling chaos of Nashville goodbye, and took a position as a night nurse at Ozark Medical Center. I'd heard strange things about the hospital growing up, whispers of things seen in the halls during the graveyard shift, anomalies, superstitions. My classmates used to dare each other to sneak inside through the back door and stay an hour without running out. Of course, I chalked it all up to the usual small-town boredom mixed with ghost stories. I never believed a word of it. Not until my first shift. The hospital sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tall oaks and a thick mist that never quite lifted from the hills. The building looked like it had been frozen in time. Gray brick walls with fading red trim, the paint chipping near every window. Despite several upgrades on the inside, Ozark Medical Center still carried the unsettling aura of a place where time stood still. My orientation was brief. A clipboard full of outdated policies, an awkward smile from the day supervisor, and a curt nod toward the locker room. That's when I met Janet. Janet was in her mid-50s, thin as a rail with graying auburn hair tied back in a tight bun. She had a tired, seasoned look in her eyes, the kind that comes from seeing too much and saying too little. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and handed me a folded slip of paper. "Don't lose this," she said. I unfolded it and frowned. It wasn't a schedule or a duty list. It was handwritten, neat cursive, ink slightly smudged. Ozark Medical Center, night shift protocol. 1. Never turn off the hallway lights between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. 2. If room 6B's door is open, shut it and do not look inside. 3. If the intercom buzzes but no one speaks, check room 3C and knock 3 times before entering. 4. If you hear whistling from the east wing, ignore it. Do not acknowledge it. 5. At 44 a.m., visit the newborn ward. Whether it's full or not, count the bassinets out loud. Report if the number has changed. 6. If a patient refers to the man in the vents, give them a red bracelet immediately and move them to room 2A. 7. Before sunrise, check the morgue. Ensure all the drawers are closed. If any are open, call Janet. Immediately. "This is a joke, right?" I asked. Janet didn't laugh. She only looked at me with the same haunted expression she'd worn since I walked in. "You'll learn," she said softly. The first half of the night was routine. A couple of elderly patients needing pain meds, one teenager with a sprained ankle whining about her cell service, and an overly chatty janitor who seemed more interested in telling me stories about his dead cat than mopping the floors. But after 2:45 a.m., the air changed. It was subtle at first. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to slow, almost like the current was struggling to flow. The temperature dropped a few degrees, though the thermostat still read 72. I could see my breath when I exhaled. Then the intercom buzzed. A harsh crackling sound, then silence. I froze, remembering rule number 3. Room 3C. I made my way down the east corridor, clipboard clutched to my chest, each step echoing a little too loudly on the waxed floors. When I reached 3C, the door was shut. I knocked 3 times, just as the paper instructed. No answer. I waited. The silence stretched thin, then snapped with a faint groan from the other side of the door, like someone shifting in an old wooden chair. I slowly opened the door. The room was empty. No patient, no chair, no sign of recent occupancy. The bed was untouched, sheets tucked tight. The monitor blinked softly, a rhythmic green pulse like a sleeping heartbeat. I backed out, closed the door, and practically jogged back to the nurse's station. Janet was there waiting. "You checked it?" she asked, her voice lower than before. "Yeah, room was empty." "Good, that's good," she nodded, then scribbled something in a worn black notebook and walked away. At 3:17 a.m., the lights began to flicker. I stood near the nurse's station, heart hammering in my chest, staring at the digital clock above the supply room. The minutes crawled forward. I didn't dare touch the hallway switches. At 3:29 a.m., a light in the far corner of the east wing burst. A loud pop, followed by a sizzle. The darkness beyond it seemed to reach forward like a living thing. At 3:30, room 6B's door creaked open. I didn't even realize I was moving until I found myself standing outside the door, hand on the knob. Every instinct in my body screamed not to look inside. I shut it firmly, twisting the handle until it clicked. Something thudded against the door from the inside. Not a loud bang, just a soft, almost curious tap. Then another. Tap. Then silence. I backed away and nearly collided with the janitor. He looked startled, but when he saw which door I was near, his face drained of color. "You didn't look inside, did you?" he whispered. "No." He nodded. "Good." I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. At 4:44 a.m., I went to the newborn ward. There were only 3 babies that night, 2 boys and a girl, all fast asleep under soft lights. But when I counted the bassinets, I found 4. One stood at the far end, darker than the rest. The sheets were slightly discolored, older. I stepped toward it and felt a chill run down my back. The tag read Baby Unknown. DOD 12/6/1996. I counted again. 4 bassinets. I turned to leave. As I walked back into the hall, I heard a faint coo behind me. It didn't sound like a newborn. I didn't look back. Just before my shift ended, I decided to visit the morgue. I wasn't required to, not on my first night, but something compelled me. The hallway leading to the basement felt longer than it should have. The air was heavy still. My footsteps became muffled. When I opened the morgue door, the overhead light flickered once, then steadied. All the drawers were closed, except one. Drawer 12. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped closer, hand trembling as I reached for my radio. Before I could call Janet, I noticed something. Inside the drawer, partially visible beneath the white sheet, was a bracelet, a red one. I slammed the drawer shut. When I returned to the nurse's station, Janet didn't ask what happened. She simply looked at me, eyes tired. "You made it," she said. "I'm not sure I want to come back." "You will," she replied, sipping her coffee. "They always come back." I stared at her. "Why?" She looked over her mug and said, "Because now the hospital knows you, and it doesn't let go that easily." I slept through most of the next day. Even after I woke up, a strange weight clung to my body, as if the hospital had followed me home and settled into my bones. I couldn't shake the images from my head. The 4th bassinet, the red bracelet in the morgue drawer, the thudding from inside 6B. Logic told me it was all a series of weird coincidences, maybe even hazing, some creepy local tradition to scare the new night nurse. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with that place. When I arrived for my second shift, the front desk nurse, a pale young girl with a hollow stare named Alice, didn't say a word. She simply handed me a clipboard and pointed to the sign-in sheet. Her fingers trembled slightly as I took the pen from her. The halls were quieter that night. Too quiet. No call lights, no patients roaming the halls. Even the usual static of the intercom had died. I found Janet near the nurse's station, seated at a small round table sipping from her ever-present coffee mug. She looked up when she saw me, her expression unreadable. "You came back," she said. "I don't think I ever had a choice." She smiled faintly, then handed me a second sheet of rules, a continuation. Additional night shift guidelines, internal staff only. 8. If a patient begins to hum Rockabye Baby and they're not in pediatrics, move them to isolation immediately. 9. Do not enter the ventilation maintenance room on B2. 10. If you hear scratching or crawling in the ceiling between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., report it. Do not look up. 11. If a patient mentions the man in the vents, ask no questions. Follow Protocol 6. 12. If you're alone and hear your name whispered behind you, do not turn around. I held the paper in my hands longer than necessary. "Who writes these?" I asked finally. "They're passed down," Janet replied. "Some come from former nurses, some from those who didn't make it through their shift." I didn't respond. What could I say to something like that? At 12:47 a.m., Room 2D's call light went off. When I arrived, the patient, an elderly man recovering from heart surgery, was sitting upright, eyes wide with fear. "I heard him," he whispered as I entered. "Heard who?" He swallowed. "The man in the vents." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I glanced at the ceiling. It looked like any other vent, square, metallic, slightly dusty. "You need anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly. "Move me, please. I don't want to be next." I checked his chart. No reason to relocate him, no orders. But I remembered rule number 6. Without asking further, I placed a red bracelet around his wrist and requested a transfer to room 2A. No one questioned it. Janet helped me move him. As we rolled his bed down the hall, he clutched the sides tightly, eyes never leaving the ceiling. "Don't let him crawl down," he muttered. "He doesn't like when you hear him. He doesn't like being noticed." Janet didn't speak. Neither did I. After the man was safely tucked into room 2A, I double-checked the door, closed the blinds, and dimmed the lights. On my way out, he grabbed my wrist. "He smells like copper," he whispered. "You'll know when he's close, like blood and rust." I nodded, gently freed myself, and stepped into the hallway. At 1:06 a.m., the scratching started. It was faint at first, like rats, maybe. Quick little scrapes moving along the vents overhead. Then the pacing began. Slow, deliberate drags of something sharp across metal. Not an animal, not a bird. It was purposeful. I clenched the hallway phone in my hand but didn't dial. I remembered rule number 10, don't look up. But I was a nurse. I was trained to investigate noises, respond to crises, and I had always hated rules that didn't make sense. So I looked. There, behind the mesh vent cover near the ceiling light above the east wing corridor, I saw something. Two pale eyes, not glowing, not monstrous, just human, bloodshot, wide, unblinking, watching me. I stepped back, heart racing. The eyes didn't move. They just stared. Then slowly the fingers appeared. Thin, too thin, bony. One after another, wrapping around the edge of the vent like a spider unfolding. I blinked and the eyes were gone. So were the fingers. I ran. Back at the nurse's station, Janet was waiting. "You looked, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. She sighed, stood, and opened the drawer beneath the desk. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in black marker. "I hoped you wouldn't," she said, handing it to me. Inside the envelope was a third set of rules. These weren't typed. They were handwritten in red ink, faded, shaky, like someone had written them while trying to keep steady under pressure. Contingency protocol. If you've seen the man in the vents, keep all vents in your assigned area closed. If one is open, do not touch it. Do not discuss what you saw with anyone outside of staff. Do not go to the bathroom alone. The man may follow you home. If so, place salt around your bed in a circle. Do not leave the circle until sunrise. If you hear tapping on your bedroom window, no matter what you hear, do not look outside. "What is this?" I asked, trying to hide the tremble in my voice. Janet didn't answer right away. She looked tired, more before. Her hands shook as she poured another cup of coffee. "You've been marked," she said. I tried to laugh, but the sound died in my throat. "What does that mean?" "It means you saw him, and once he knows you've seen him, he gets curious." I worked the rest of the shift in silence. No more scratching, no calls, no signs of the man in the vents. But when I left the hospital at sunrise, my car's windshield had fogged over from the morning, and someone had drawn a single shape in the condensation, a perfect circle lined with tiny finger scratches. That night at home, I poured a ring of salt around my bed. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard tapping at my window. The tapping continued for over an hour, soft at first, like fingernails against glass, then louder, more insistent. I kept my eyes shut, hands clenched around the edge of my blanket, salt circling my bed like a barrier between me and whatever waited outside the window. I refused to look. By 4:30 a.m., it stopped, but the silence that followed was worse than the noise. Thick, heavy. I could almost hear it breathing. I stayed awake until the first light of dawn cracked through the blinds, breaking the darkness like a promise. That morning, I told myself I wouldn't go back to Ozark Medical Center. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, fingers hovering over Janet's number, ready to quit. But something stopped me. The red bracelet. I'd found it in my coat pocket. I'd never put it there. I hadn't even worn that coat last night. Yet there it was, stretched and faded, as if someone or something had left it for me. I showed up for my third shift just before sunset. The sky was still streaked orange when I pulled into the hospital parking lot, but the building already looked like it was swallowed in shadow. Janet wasn't at the station this time. Instead, a nurse I didn't recognize handed me a different clipboard. No smile, no eye contact. Just a name tag that read, Linda. She was older than me, mid-60s maybe, with long white hair braided down her back and skin wrinkled like aged paper. She didn't speak a word as she turned and walked down the hall. I followed her through a wing I didn't recognize, past the normal wards, past the supply closets, and then further, down a narrow corridor I'd never seen before. The lights here were dimmer, dustier. I noticed the walls looked older, not just from lack of cleaning, but like they hadn't been touched in decades. At the end of the corridor was a rusted metal door with a faded sign. Ward C, restricted access. Linda produced a key from her pocket and unlocked it without a word. As the door creaked open, I was hit by a wave of stale air, the kind that hadn't moved in years. Inside were rows of empty beds, dust coated everything. Old medical equipment stood covered in yellowing plastic. The room stretched deep, further than it should have, almost like it bent space itself. "Why are we here?" I asked. Linda finally spoke. Her voice was brittle and low, like leaves blowing across concrete. "Your name showed up." "What do you mean?" "Every nurse that's marked eventually gets assigned to Ward C." She handed me a thin folder. My name was scrawled across the front in red ink. Inside were just 2 sheets of paper. One was a short patient list, 3 names, all underlined. The other was another set of handwritten rules. Ward C protocol. Level 2 access only. Always knock twice before entering each room, even if unoccupied. Do not answer if anyone calls you by name inside Ward C. If you hear typing from room C3, ignore it. There is no computer in that room. Every hour, open the door to room C5. Never step inside. Just open and close it. If one of the patients disappears, do not search for them. Mark their bed with a black X and wait. If you see yourself inside one of the rooms, shut the door immediately. Do not engage. I stared at the paper, then looked up at Linda. "Are there actual patients in here?" She nodded once. "Not in the way you think." I didn't understand what that meant until I started my rounds. Room C1 was empty. I knocked twice, entered, and found a pristine bed. But the temperature was off, too cold, like someone had just left. Room C2 had an old woman sitting in the chair by the window, her back turned to me. I greeted her softly. She didn't move. I stepped closer. Her breathing was shallow, rhythmic. I touched her shoulder gently. She turned around slowly, revealing a face that was eerily familiar. It was me, older, much older. Wrinkles cut deep into the skin, eyes dull but locked onto mine. She didn't speak, just smiled, a tired, knowing smile, and turned back toward the window. I backed out of the room and shut the door without another word. By 1 a.m. I had made a full sweep. Each room brought new discomfort, faint whispering, doors creaking behind me, shadows that didn't belong. Then I heard it, typing, soft, rapid keystrokes. I was in the hallway near room C3. I stopped, heart racing. There wasn't supposed to be a computer in there. The room was empty, used for storage, but the sound was unmistakable. Click-clack, click-clack. I pressed my ear against the door. The typing stopped. Then something pressed back from the other side. Not knocking, pressing, like a palm slowly pushing against the wood. I stumbled away. The door creaked open on its own an inch. Inside was a desk and an old typewriter. A piece of paper was still inside it. I don't remember walking in, but I found myself standing at the typewriter, looking down at the sheet. Typed on it were the words, "Do you remember what you did, Nurse Harper?" That wasn't my name. My name is Emma Cole. I backed away, breathing fast, mind spinning. As I turned to run out, something grabbed my wrist, freezing, skeletal fingers wrapped around my skin. I screamed, yanked myself free, and ran straight to the hallway. Linda was waiting. "You went in, didn't you?" There was a typewriter. It knew my name, a different name. Linda nodded. "Sometimes they confuse the nurses. You're not the first." "I don't understand." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out another envelope. "I hoped you wouldn't need this yet, but here." Inside was a photograph, black and white, old. It showed a nurse standing outside Ozark Medical Center in the 1960s. She wore a name tag, Harper, E. She looked exactly like me, identical. I looked up at Linda, trembling. "What is this?" "Some of the nurses don't come here for the first time," she said. "Some return." My ears began to ring. My vision blurred for a second. I stumbled back and leaned against the wall. Linda stepped closer, eyes tired but firm. "Ward C remembers, and if you saw her, it means it's starting again." "Starting what?" "Your shift," she said. "Your real one." After seeing the photo of Nurse Harper, the woman who looked just like me, my thoughts unraveled like a frayed thread. That night, I couldn't concentrate. My hands trembled when I wrote impatient charts. I misread medications, double-checked vitals more than necessary, and kept glancing at reflective surfaces, half expecting to see someone else's face looking back. I wasn't just frightened. I was becoming unhinged. The fourth night started differently. Janet was back at the nurse's station, but she didn't greet me. Her eyes were rimmed red, face drawn tight like she hadn't slept in days. When I opened my locker, I found a folded paper inside that hadn't been there before. It was a memo. Internal notice, July 28th, subject, mirror protocol activation. Level read, all mirrors and reflective surfaces must be covered between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not attempt to uncover them. If you see your reflection move independently, evacuate the area. If your reflection smiles before you do, report to the west stairwell immediately and wait for further instruction. Do not follow your reflection under any circumstance. I crumpled the paper and shoved it in my pocket. I hadn't noticed any issues with mirrors before, but maybe I'd never looked long enough. As I made my rounds, I felt increasingly watched, not by people, but by space itself. The walls seemed to close in just slightly, like they were leaning closer each time I turned away. Around 2:15 a.m., I entered the break room. Someone had forgotten to cover the mirror above the sink. I caught my reflection before I could look away. It stared back, but not quite in sync. I blinked once. She didn't. I tilted my head slightly. She smiled. And then the reflection mouthed something. No sound, just lips moving. 3 words. You belong here. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My heart galloped in my chest. Before I could even run, the mirror cracked on its own. A long fracture across the center, splitting the face down the middle. I ran. Janet met me in the hallway, grabbed my arm before I could speak. I told them not to activate mirror protocol. Knock, she whispered angrily. It's too early. Too early for what? She didn't answer. Just pulled me aside into an empty supply closet. Inside, she handed me an old patient file, yellowed, brittle, kept in a plastic sleeve. Patient name, Eleanor Harper. Admission date, April 2nd, 1967. Status, deceased, presumed. Incident report. Patient claims to be a nurse from the future. Experienced episodes of identity confusion, mirror-induced psychosis, and chronic nightmares. Repeated statements. I've been here before, and the hospital won't let me leave. Final sighting occurred after unauthorized access to Ward C. Body never recovered. Case closed. I stared at the file, heart sinking. They think I'm her, I said. Janet shook her head. Not think, you are her. That's impossible. She gave a tired sigh. Time bends here. Some of us come back. Some of us never leave. You're part of this place now. Maybe always have been. Before I could ask anything more, the hospital went dark. All lights, every hallway, every room flickered once, then died. An emergency alarm buzzed, low and broken. A single red light began to blink above the elevator. Code gray, lockdown activated. Janet cursed under her breath. They opened room 0. Room what? Basement level. Subfloor, beneath Ward C. I didn't even know a floor existed below C. Why would anyone open that? No one opens it, she said grimly. It opens itself when the cycle begins. She reached into her jacket and handed me a flashlight and another note, hastily scribbled in pen on torn paper. Emergency lockdown procedures. Do not use elevators. Stay away from vents and mirrors. If you hear a voice calling from below, do not respond. If the lights come back but flicker every 33 seconds, they are not our lights. Most importantly, do not go to room 0 unless instructed by admin code black. What's admin code black? I asked. Janet didn't answer. She was staring down the hallway. The red lights had begun to pulse faster, like a heartbeat increasing in panic, and that's when we heard the scream. It echoed up from the lower levels. Not human. Something distorted, stretched like sound trying to pass through thick water. Then came the scratching, not from the ceiling this time, from beneath the floor. Squirch! Squirch! Janet grabbed my wrist. We have to seal the basement. We moved fast, flashlight cutting through the red glow. The hospital had changed again. Hallways were slightly off, doors not where they were the night before. The scent of copper and damp rot clung to the air. We passed the pediatric wing. Every bassinet was empty, except for one, the same fourth one from before. Only this time, something was in it. A shape, wrapped in a sheet, not moving. But as I passed, the mobile above it began to spin, slowly, without wind, and the shape giggled, low, raspy, old. We didn't stop. Janet led me down a staircase I never knew existed behind a panel in the janitor's closet. Each step creaked louder than the last, and with every step the temperature dropped. At the bottom was a large iron door. A sign above it read, Room 0, authorized staff only, entry final. There was no handle, only a keyhole and a keypad. Before Janet could unlock it, she turned to me. If it pulls you in, she said, voice barely above a whisper, don't fight. What's behind the door? Her eyes glistened. Everything the hospital doesn't want you to remember. Then she inserted the key. The lock clicked. The door didn't open. It breathed. A long exhale of cold air and distant voices spilled out, and I recognized one of them. It was my voice, crying for help. Janet turned the knob. Inside was nothing but darkness, and the sound of mirrors shattering, one after another. The door to room 0 creaked open like the lungs of a dead god exhaling. From the black void beyond the threshold, cold air billowed out, thick and damp, crawling up my skin like invisible worms. My flashlight flickered violently as soon as I pointed it inside. No walls, no floor, just an endless tunnel of darkness, and far in the distance, the faint echo of my own voice calling my name. I should have run, but something pulled me forward. Janet reached out, grabbing my wrist. Wait, she whispered. If you go in, you might not come out the same. I need to know, I said. I need to know who I am. She let go, eyes full of sorrow. Then don't believe everything you see in there. With that, I stepped across the threshold. The air was immediately heavier, denser, like walking through water. My ears began to ring, and every breath came with resistance, like the atmosphere was thick with memory. Not just mine, but countless others, as if the walls themselves had absorbed every scream, every mistake, every ghostly whisper that Ozark Medical Center had ever silenced. My flashlight dimmed to a soft orange glow. The tunnel turned into a corridor, narrow and lined with peeling wallpaper that shimmered with liquid reflections. I passed rusted stretchers, full poles with dried blood crusted around the tips, and open doors that revealed twisted versions of hospital rooms. In one room, I saw myself sitting at a desk, typing furiously on an old typewriter. My eyes were red, hair tangled, muttering nonsense under my breath. When I leaned in closer, the other me slowly looked up and smiled with teeth that weren't mine. I ran. The corridor began to shift. Now I was walking through memories, not just rooms. One moment I stood in my childhood bedroom, hearing my father yell downstairs. The next, I was back in college, studying under a flickering lamp as something skittered across the ceiling tiles behind me. Then, back in the hospital, holding a patient's hand as they flatlined, feeling something watching me from inside the walls. Then came her, Eleanor Harper. She stood in the center of a hallway flooded with red light, facing away from me. Same height, same build, same voice. When she spoke, it was like hearing my own voice echo from the bottom of a well. You came back. I'm not you, I said. But you are, she replied. You've always been. She turned slowly. Her face was identical to mine, but wrong. The skin was waxy, too tight. Her smile twitched at the corners, too wide. You were here before. You never left. You just forgot. My head pounded. My knees buckled. I dropped to the floor, covering my ears, trying to shut her out. I was transferred here last week, I whispered. I had a life, a mother. She crouched beside me, her voice now like cracking ice. You had a memory. This place rewrote it. Why? Because you were chosen. Because you broke the rules. Because the hospital needs someone to remember what happened in room 0. I looked up at her. What did happen? Her smile dropped. You let them die. The walls screamed. Not metaphorically, they screamed. Hundreds of voices cried out, all layered over each other like a choir of agony. You disobeyed protocol. You opened a door that was never meant to be opened. A patient escaped, and everything changed. I shook my head. That wasn't me. It was, she hissed, and now the hospital is folding in on itself to bring you back, to punish you, to use you. Behind her, shadows rose, human forms, some dragging IV poles, others crawling on the walls like insects. All were pale, faceless, whispering my name. Emma, Emma, Eleanor, Eleanor. I turned and ran, but room 0 didn't have exits, only more doors. Each time I passed through one, I came out in a different part of Ozark Medical Center, but twisted, corrupted. The pediatric ward, lights strobing, bassinets filled with teeth instead of babies. The ICU, monitors flatlined, yet corpses sat upright, clapping slowly. The morgue, drawers wide open, every body standing perfectly still, heads tilted toward the ceiling. And then the vent opened. He crawled out. The man in the vents. Long limbs, pale skin stretched like canvas over bone. His face was smeared with soot and dried blood. No eyes, no nose, just a gaping mouth full of rusted metal and nails. He didn't walk. He slithered upright, his arms bending backward as he moved toward me. I froze behind me, mirrors shattered on the walls. He pointed, not at me, but behind me. There I was, again, in a nurse's uniform, holding a newborn and smiling. And then everything turned white. I woke up in a hospital bed, Ozark Medical Center, room 1A. Janet stood at the foot of the bed. You made it out, she said quietly. What happened? I croaked. You finished your shift. I looked down. My arms had bruises as if I'd been restrained. My name tag sat on the bedside table. It didn't read Emma Cole. It read Eleanor Harper. No, I whispered. She stepped closer. You were always her. I don't remember. You will, she said. The hospital never lets you forget. It just waits. She walked to the door. Before she left, she turned one last time. Rest, Eleanor. You're on again tomorrow night. The door shut behind her, and from the ceiling vent above me, I heard soft scratching. Then a voice, raspy, metallic, whispered, Welcome home. The end. Ozark Medical Center is now accepting new staff. Night shifts only. Training not required. Just follow the rules.